It's great. We're lucky to have her. And she did a program for us last year on migration and the impact of the winter on the deer, and it was wonderful. So we thank her for coming to join us again this year. A couple of announcements for the group. Chrissy wanted me to announce next week is the health fair here on Wednesday and Thursday. If you want to come early, you can start at 6. So anyway, be reminded of that. And then on the email I sent out for the 23rd, it said that we have Copper France and Karen Youngberg talking about financial scams. Well, we also have 2 additional speakers that day. Sheriff Backen from Rollins, and then the IT director for the county, Matt Webster, will also be here, so it will be Scamorama. So please join us for that. So anyway, we're glad you're here, and Teal, you can take it away. Thanks again.
No scams today. We're just going to be talking about sage grouse. I guess just so I can get a feel for how many of you are familiar with the bird, I bet most of you are. How many of you have been to a sage grouse lek before? So they're dancing grounds. Okay, so most of you. So this might not be a lot of new information for you all, but I'd like to kick it off if you guys haven't been to a lek or if it's been some time, just to let you listen to the sounds of spring in the Wyoming sagebrush sea. So this is an adult male sage grouse, and he's on a lek, or their traditional strutting grounds, and this is where they perform their courtship displays each spring. So you can hear that swish pop, swish pop. And I think Sally said it best, they are pretty pompous, those males on the leks. So that sound, and we'll talk a little bit more about the dynamics of how they create that sound with those air sacs, which is really unique to the greater sage grouse. You can hear that sound on a not so windy day, which we don't have many in the springtime in Wyoming, but you can hear that sound that they create on the leks from more than a mile away on a day where it's not windy. So the whole goal of that display is to attract females from far beyond the leks. So they have to be really effective with that noise, that swish pop that they're creating. So listen when you're in the sagebrush, even if you turn off the engine of your vehicle parked down on a county road, anywhere around Saratoga, you could probably, we've got enough leks here, you could probably hear strutting sage grouse if you're out at the right time of day. So we're going to talk a little bit about right time of day to be out there seeing sage grouse and hearing sage grouse, but pretty phenomenal time of year to be out and about, and that's the traditional sounds of Wyoming greater sage grouse courtship. Wyoming is a pretty special place in terms of sage grouse. 37% of the range-wide distribution of sage grouse live right here in Wyoming. So we are the stronghold of the greater sage grouse in the Intermountain West, which is pretty amazing. You all are familiar with kind of where they live. We call it the sagebrush sea or the sagebrush steppe. These are sagebrush obligate species, which means they rely solely on sagebrush during certain times of year, winter in particular, to survive. There's a whole suite of what we call sagebrush obligate species. It sounds like Bergquist was here maybe a couple weeks ago, maybe talked about some of the passerines or songbirds that live within the sagebrush sea. But it's definitely important for you to know that there are a lot of sage grouse or sagebrush obligates out there, not just the greater sage grouse. But we are the stronghold here in Wyoming. This map just shows in the light brown color the distribution of sage grouse throughout the Intermountain West, and you can see a lot of Wyoming has sagebrush steppe. Therefore, we are the stronghold of sage grouse in the West. 90% of the estimated historic habitat is still occupied by sage grouse in Wyoming, so that's a pretty special thing. We've been able to maintain that status as a stronghold of sage grouse. In a lot of other states, although we're experiencing similar declines in our sage grouse populations, much of the historically occupied habitat still has sage grouse in it, which is pretty special for Wyoming. And then we have 1,700 known leks, which are occupied by sage grouse, and that's across Wyoming. And to kind of get a pulse for where we're at in Carbon County, I have about 77, I think, leks that are occupied within my biologist district. My neighbor over in Baggs has about 70 that he monitors. These are known and occupied leks. The Rollins biologist, many of you have probably met Greg Hyatt, he just retired, so we're going to have a new Rollins biologist, but within that district, there's about 125 sage grouse leks. So in Carbon County alone, we've got a lot of those leks. And then the other kind of stronghold, I would say, in Wyoming for sage grouse is this western portion of Wyoming over toward Pinedale. Many of you have probably heard of the Golden Triangle before. That's in terms of really pristine sagebrush steppe country. So there's a lot of leks, a lot of sage grouse in this Pinedale, western Wyoming country. And then, although it's changing pretty rapidly, we do have quite a few sage grouse that used to inhabit the northeastern portion of Wyoming, so up toward Gillette. We've experienced in the last 20 years a lot of population decline in northeastern Wyoming, but it used to be one of the strongest portions of population of sage grouse in Wyoming. So overall, I just want you guys to understand we are a pretty cool place when it comes to sage grouse. We've got a lot of grouse here in Wyoming, which means that we also have a lot of responsibility in terms of conserving this species. So we're going to talk about Endangered Species Act and how it was potentially going to be listed back in 2010 and also reviewed in 2015. So a lot of responsibility falls on the state of Wyoming to conserve this bird to avoid a listing on the Endangered Species Act. So I'm not going to try to bore you with like a bunch of figures because that's probably not what you guys want to see, but I think it's important to kind of understand the status of sage grouse in Wyoming specifically. So estimating sage grouse populations is really difficult to do, and currently in Wyoming we don't have a statistically valid way to say this is exactly how many sage grouse we believe to have in Wyoming. So what we do each year is we go out and we monitor sage grouse leks. Again, these are their traditional breeding grounds where they have those courtship displays. And our goal of monitoring those leks is to determine the peak number of males on an annual basis at each of those leks. Once we establish that, we can determine trends in the population just based on the attendance to those leks. We don't base it off the number of females that are attending leks because females are oftentimes very well camouflaged. Even when they're on those breeding grounds that it might be a little bit easier to see, they're just not as pompous as the males. So we have a much easier time of counting males, feeling really good about our estimate of number of males on the leks, and then assessing changes over time based on the abundance of those males on leks. So if you ask me how many sage grouse do we have in Wyoming, I could probably give you an answer. Whether it's a statistically valid answer, I probably can't share that at this point. But we are working on that. There's been a lot of research coming out over the last few years about how we could potentially estimate the population of sage grouse. For now, the best data that we have is just tracking trends in population based on that male attendance at the leks. So you can see this is 2014 through 2023. And this is the average male attendance on these leks through that time frame, 2014 to 2023. So the last peak that we had in this population was back in 2016. If you all remember back to 2016, it was pretty phenomenal conditions as far as sage grouse are concerned. We had a lot of spring moisture at the correct amount of time, or at the correct time, and it was just really good conditions for grouse. We were kind of breaking out of that drought cycle, and that really helped those grouse out in 2016. Since 2016, we've started to see a decline in the population. 2021 was what we consider the trough of that population, or the more recent trough. And now, ever since 2021, we've been climbing out of that trough. We're starting to see an uptick in the number of males attending leks. Maybe if you all pursue sage grouse or out in the fall, you probably saw a lot of birds last year. It seemed like all that moisture really paid off for sage grouse last year. Those chicks had the right amount of moisture to create a great insect crop, which is really what they rely on when they're itty bitty chicks. So I think we're climbing out of the trough. Based on what I've seen on leks so far, things are looking pretty good this spring as well. I think we're going to see another increase in male attendance at leks. So again, making a climb out of the trough. This is a similar figure, but it shows 2000 through 2023. So I just wanted to point out that sage grouse, like many bird species, like many species, are cyclical in nature. And that cycle of troughs and peaks is really driven, what we think, by drought, those drought cycles. And as they can kind of break out of those drought cycles, we start seeing an increase in sage grouse numbers. The thing that we monitor on a statewide basis is how high these peaks are once they start breaking out of a drought cycle and how low our troughs are. And what we're starting to see is that long term, our peaks in population are lower than they had been historically, and our troughs are much lower than they had been historically. So although we might be climbing out of a pretty bad time for sage grouse in 2021, I imagine that peak in our population that might come in the next few years is going to be lower than what we had historically seen over the last 20 years. So long term, we're seeing definitely population decline, even though that cyclical pattern of troughs and peaks is still happening. So as a manager, what we're trying to achieve is, trying to level out or try to not make those troughs as dramatic and make those peaks higher if possible. It's a tough thing to do when the bird is really being controlled by drought cycles. But we're going to talk about a few other threats to sage grouse that as managers we can kind of consider how to reduce those threats to sage grouse. So this is just long term, what we've seen at a statewide level. Sage grouse are a little bit different. Many of you have probably heard about like the cycle of lynx and snowshoe hare and how it's basically on a 10-year basis. You can assume that there's going to be a peak in population, and then that next 10 years rolls around, another peak in population. Sage grouse are not as predictable. It seems like they would be based on this figure, but we estimate about 6 to 8 years is their cycle of peaks and troughs. So kind of interesting in that sense, but a little bit more fluid than some other species that are really well monitored, like lynx and snowshoe hare. Just wanted to cover some of the life stages and the habitat use during different types of years for sage grouse. So it might give you an idea as to where you might be seeing birds, where they might be doing some nesting, raising their young. So really we consider the start of the biological year to be right now when they're at their leks or their breeding grounds. So that basically is from March until May. So it's a pretty long period where these males are strutting and trying to attract females on these lek sites. So leks are pretty unique. I don't know if this laser pointer is going to work. Probably not. The leks are pretty unique. They have to have very good sagebrush cover nearby, but generally the lek itself is a spot that's either heavily grazed, so it's low cover, or it might have some sort of like gravel or some sort of more level component that doesn't have as much cover. So they still require a bunch of sagebrush cover to be nearby the lek site, but typically birds are going to be focusing on strutting within these kind of well-grazed areas or even disturbed sites. So sometimes, like the public viewing lek that I'll show you, they are strutting right in the middle of Pass Creek Road. Probably because the road was built through a historical lek, but the other factor is they like kind of that level spot where they can display. Sometimes females will try to get a topographic advantage, so they'll be up above the lek if there's some sort of topography that lends itself to being kind of perched above the lek, so they can check it out without being at risk of being predated on the lek. Because I guess we could call them sitting grouse instead of sitting ducks, but really when they're out there acting like this, they're vulnerable to predation. So the females have a little bit more sense that time of year, maybe all times of year, but definitely this time of year. And they'll be kind of watching from afar before they advance into the lek. And really that's just strategy to reduce predation. The males, they've got other things on their minds for sure. So March through May, they're going to be strutting. Basically the most fit males, which are probably the males that are going to do the most breeding, they will be out there every single day, pending any sort of major disturbance. And of course, sometimes we do see disturbance on the lek, maybe like a herd of elk will run through a lek. That's going to kind of fluster those birds. They'll probably move off the lek for a little bit, but they'll probably come back the next day. Sometimes we see some aerial predators like ravens, other hawks or raptors kind of fly above the lek. Usually that just makes them hunker down or move to cover on the outside of the lek. Sometimes it's enough to flush them off the lek entirely, so they'll have to come back the next day. but the most fit males will be attending that lek every single day for that two-month period. So if you haven't been to a lek, it's not too late. Some of the best attendance is happening right now. I imagine peak male attendance will be happening probably in the next 2 weeks, pending any sort of crazy weather that causes them to either move off a lek or kind of delay their strutting activity. So really good time of year to get out and see grouse during that strutting activity. Let's see.
How about time of day?
Yeah, so time of day, those boys get out to the lek early, which means that if you want to see a lek, you have to be out there early too. So typically when we're monitoring leks, we try to be at a lek about a half hour before sunrise, and those birds will strut clear until probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours after sunrise. So usually by about 9 o'clock this time of year, those birds are starting to move off the lek. The juvenile or the young males will still be kind of hanging out, kind of strutting their stuff, but the females have all like decided that they're going to go get coffee or whatever the females do after a morning at the lek. So I would say sunrise is when you want to be at the lek if you want to see the most activity as far as birds are concerned. So after breeding, the next logical step is nesting, right? So the females will move off the leks. The really interesting thing about sage grouse, and it kind of plays into how we manage grouse in what we call our core area strategy, is they don't go very far from the lek. About 80% of females will nest within 4 miles of the lek. So they're pretty close proximity. I mean, 4 miles is still a pretty long ways from a lek. But generally speaking, as far as species are concerned, they're not moving a really far distance from that lek to do their nesting and early brood rearing. So that's why they require that really good sagebrush component so close to the lek. The lek site might not look like much, but they really want a good sagebrush component outside the lek so that it's conducive for nesting. And basically they look for sagebrush that kind of creates an umbrella. So you can imagine the sagebrush is just kind of like a miniature forest, and they want to see and find the best sagebrush canopy to tuck these nests into. And although their chicks there are pretty discreet and really well camouflaged, they need to do their best to camouflage them even more by selecting the best sagebrush cover to put those nests in. So they are ground nesters. They'll put that little bowl-shaped nest underneath the sagebrush. Again, most females are going to be nesting within 4 miles of the lek center. They will lay about 2 to 3 eggs for about a week straight. And normal clutch size is about 6 to 10. So they're having 6 to 10 chicks. They incubate those nests for about 28 days. So depending on when they're bred, when they leave to nest, they could be nesting clear through the end of May through early July, depending on, again, when they're bred. So these chicks will pop up, and they are really ravenous when they're first born. They can fly within a week, and they're super hungry when they're born, and the first thing that they're going to be picking at are these little forbs, which are flowering plants, and also insects. So they're not going to be selecting for sagebrush when they're chicks. That comes a little bit later on when they become adult birds or early juvenile birds. These chicks are going to be selecting flowers and insects, and that's why spring moisture is so important for sage grouse, because spring moisture creates insects. And if there aren't the insects available to chicks, we're probably going to have poor survival on our chicks, because everything has to do with body weight of those chicks. Survival increases if body weight increases. If they don't have the insects, they're going to be skinny little chicks and probably really prone to mortality. So nesting and early brood rearing. So early brood rearing just means the hen is kind of shuffling these chicks around to little spots where they can get water and insects. That's happening May through early July. Late brood rearing occurs July through even when we start hunting sage grouse into like September and early October. Really, if you're trying to find sage grouse that time of year when those birds can finally fly a little bit, those juveniles can finally fly, the moms are going to be bringing them to these kind of wet meadows. So these little green ribbons throughout the sagebrush. These are really important, again, because they can still be picking insects in those flowering plants, those forbs, and then they'll start moving into a diet that's primarily sagebrush. So this is what, it's a hatchier bird, but it's a little bit older. This would be the late brood rearing phase. That's about how big they are. They can fly pretty well at that age. By early September, they can fly well with mom, and they can fly pretty far distances. Before that, they can fly really short distances and keep up with mom, but they prefer to walk on the ground. By late fall, they're pretty darn good flyers. Late November, December, and January, and February, these birds are in their winter concentration areas. So they flock up, and by this time, they're selecting only for sagebrush. So they're eating primarily, really only sagebrush. And the neat thing about sage grouse is they're one of the few species that actually, if they have access to continuous tracts of sagebrush, they can actually put on weight in the wintertime. So usually they do really well. So last winter when we saw like our pronghorn and our deer really struggling, people were calling, like, what's happening to the sage grouse? So there going to be any sage grouse left. And the nice thing about sage grouse is as long as they have access to sagebrush in a continuous fashion, they're actually probably putting on weight in the wintertime, even if conditions are pretty severe. There are, of course, limits to that. Like last winter, we definitely had places where sage grouse typically wintered that was just entirely covered by snow. If they don't have access to the sagebrush, they might be struggling the same as some of our other species. But really neat that sage grouse are able to actually put on weight in the wintertime, which is just not something that other species typically do. They can tunnel underneath the snow. That's a thermal refuge for them. And you will also see these big wintering flocks that are kind of huddled together. They're doing that to conserve energy and stay warm as well. So they're just really well adapted for our hot summers and our very brutal winters. They're made to survive in Wyoming. Any questions about kind of the life stages of sage grouse? Yeah.
When you talked about the nesting and when they go and actually, do they carry stuff in to create the nest? What kind of nest, I mean, go through, can you actually see a nest, or is it just like underneath the sagebrush? Is it?
I have found very few sage grouse nests for birds that we don't have transmitters on. So they are very discreet nesters. They're usually using litter like around the ground where they're actually building that nest. So they're not like transporting a lot of vegetation into or underneath the canopy of that sagebrush. They're actually just collecting litter from around that actual brush that they're building the nest under. But super discreet, and those chicks are so well camouflaged, even when they are coming, when they're hatched, they're very difficult to see. Probably the first time that you start seeing chicks is when they can actually start flying with mom a week or 2 weeks after hatching. They'll kind of fly these short distances if you flush them up. Before that, they're super discreet, even when they're just walking on the ground along the sagebrush. So just a couple random quick facts about the greater sage grouse. They're the largest grouse species in North America. So male sage grouse can weigh up to 7 pounds. They are what we call sexually dimorphic. So the males are larger than the females. They're usually about double the size of a female. So a female is probably going to be about 3 to 4 pounds. But in terms of just bird species, a 7-pound bird is a pretty darn big bird. And they're just unique in general. And a lot of our grouse species are usually short-lived. Sage grouse are not. They are a longer-lived species, which I think we've got a fact on there a little bit later. But they're just totally unique, and their size really is one of the unique factors about them. They kind of look like a turkey running through the sagebrush. They're so big. Greater sage grouse do not swallow and hold gizzard stones, so oftentimes you'll see other bird species, what we call picking grit along roadways. Like early morning, you'll see them kind of picking that grit. That's because they need to be able to get that grit or those stones into their gizzard, and it's a muscular appendage that allows them to grind up seeds and get all the nutritional value from seeds. Sage grouse do not have that. They don't have a gizzard or a muscular gizzard. They don't grind up seeds. Again, they're mostly eating sagebrush during the latter portion of the year, and before that they're eating those kind of tender forbs and insects. So kind of unique that they don't have a gizzard. Greater sage grouse can live between 3 and 6 years, and some can live up to 9 years, which is just totally unique for a game bird species. Most of them, you're lucky to get them a year or 2 years old. Sage grouse are a really long-lived species, which also kind of lends itself to how we manage sage grouse, or we should be considering how we manage sage grouse. In 2010, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service found that the greater sage grouse was warranted but precluded from the Endangered Species Act. This is because of some conservation measures that states like Wyoming were already taking by time this decision was made. It was also evaluated in 2015 whether the species should be listed on the Endangered Species Act. Again, it was found to be warranted but precluded. I imagine, unless something wild happens in my lifetime as a biologist, we will probably see the sage grouse end up on the Endangered Species Act. But we are trying to be very proactive as a state in terms of conservation measures to keep them off the Endangered Species Act if we can. So we'll talk a little bit about some of those conservation measures later on. But it is something that's been reviewed several times in the last few decades. So we're going to talk a little bit about Lex, and if you guys haven't visited the Cornell or the Audubon site, they have some phenomenal videos, good videographers, much better than I can do with my cell phone, Lex, so I thought I would just share some of these videos about what courtship displays look like on the Lex. And it's really neat. It kind of gets into the anatomy of these courtship displays and how they create these sounds.
Okay, let's look at what male sage grouse need to do to impress female sage grouse. The first thing you see is they're really impressive plumage, that white pendulous bit around their neck and spiky tail. And they've got that high contrast black above and below. The little hair-like things in the back are phyllo plumes sticking up. They're pretty cool looking, but it's what they do with all that kit that's so amazing. Yeah, the display is, it goes really fast, but it's 3 heaves of that big throat pouch. 1, 2, 3. You know, to really see it, we have to slow it down. And now here come these swishes. First swish.
So he's rubbing his wings along these stiff feathers here, which is making that swishing sound.
Rewind and play over again. On the sides of the pouch, you can really see the stiff feathers. Those things are, God, they're like the teeth of a comb, and they rub them across the edge of the wing and make their sound with those. And then in that last heave, the wings are a little out to the side, and they pull their heads down into the air sac. You can really see it better from the side. All right, here we go. Swish. Swish. I actually think, okay, let's back up a little bit and hold that one frame. You see how his head is pulled in? Right there, you don't even see it. It disappears into the bottom. And the air sacs bulge all the way out. And it creates this pop, whistle pop sound. So a sage grouse call is sort of all of that popping and whistling is actually sounds radiating through those air sacs. Okay, let's go back to real speed. As if that wasn't complicated enough, the whole package.
So this is a hen
really
here.
both
She doesn't have those
visually and
big white and
These guys actually sound better from the
olive-colored
side.
air sacs.
Thuddy from the front and sharp from the side. You can see the female gets a particular perspective on that male. He has to keep her in a particular place so she sees him the best and can assess him the best. So it's kind of a dance. He's going to turn, she's going to turn. It's almost as if he's not looking right at her, but he's displaying right at her. And he has to read the cues from her really well. If he's being too aggressive, she'll just walk away. She gets to listen to hundreds of these displays and just sit there and see how he does, over and over again.
So the fittest males and the males that are probably going to breed most of the females on those leks are displaying like that every single day for up to maybe 2.5 months. So really, the science isn't really quite there as to what exactly that female is looking for. Is it a combination of the sound, the color of those air sacs. Is there like a certain kind of olive yellow she's looking for? It's hard for us to differentiate. But what we typically think is she is able to key in on the most fit male, and she wants to select those genetics for her offspring. So it might be the male that's out there every single day. It might be the male that's got the best dance and the best sound that he's producing. It's tough for us to say, but they've got a way of determining that. So there might be 1 or 2 males that actually breed most of the females on the lac. The juvenile or young males, they're probably not going to get any breeding done unless they are super fit within their first year. So these males are intensely territorial on lek sites. These lek sites might be as large as a football field in some instances. We've got a lot of varying size leks across the county, but many of them are at least 100 yards span. But the males are actually only defending or displaying in a territory that might be a few yards wide. So within that entire lek site, they are defending or displaying in a territory that's fairly small. Usually, but not always, if you can pick out what you would consider the center of the lek, the king male or the king couple of males are probably in the center of the lek and defending a territory within the center of the lek. And then the females will watch from the side and eventually enter and kind of check them out like that female was doing in that video. So if you're trying to figure out who might be doing the most breeding, it's usually the males that are displaying closest to what you would consider the center of the lek, most of the time.
In your observation, can you tell size difference? Because we talked about it. The bigger males, are they that much bigger than the other males?
No, it's really tough to say. So like first year males on the leks, it's hard to differentiate the size of those. From my eye, a hen sage grouse may be able to figure that out. She probably can. But from my eye, it's really difficult to tell size difference between those males, even if they're young males versus older males. And basically, it's just something you can't fake. These males can't fake it. If they're not fit, they don't have the highest fitness, they can't fake this lek display, or they can't fake this dance for as long term. So the females can really pick that out. And ultimately, it's lady's choice. She chooses who she breeds with. He doesn't really do much choosing at all. So it's lady's choice when it comes to the leks. Play this little video here. I think this talks a little bit more about females.
In sage grouse, it's the males doing all the fancy displaying, but the little gray females actually run the show. All right, let's look at this guy. He looks great, right? He's displaying just like the guy behind him, and there's a female.
Not really interested. Just moving on.
She's unimpressed. Here, I'm great. I mean, to us, he looks great. Now he's sort of walking along with them, and that might be part of his problem. Maybe not taking no for an answer. He's supposed to be a little more casual about it. But he gets to the end of his territory, and he's got to turn around. Hoping more females come by, but they're not impressed either. They are super picky. The females hold the males to a really high standard. The females are going to inspect multiple males like this. They're going to walk around through all the territories and really only visit and sit and listen to a few. All right, let's take a look at a more successful male. We see this female and think about what she's thinking. She is trying to discern whether he is the one. This male is going to display to her hundreds of times. She can judge not just his looks, but she can measure how consistent he is. Does he seem to be getting tired? She can hear him from every angle. Can he do it and then be able to fight and come back and keep doing it?
So they fight a lot on leks, and that's another way that she can judge fitness, who is able to compete, chase off a less dominant male, and come back and still continue that dance.
And coming out here and making measurements to see what it is about males that make them the one. We measure the things we can measure, but females get a whole picture. They're integrated
So once I figure out what makes them the one, I'm gonna write a really cool paper and I'll share it with you all. Still trying to figure out the love dynamics of a sage grouse. Yeah.
Okay, let's look at what male.
Maybe it's a smell or smell.
In sage grouse, it's the male.
See if I can get us to the next slide. Okay, so springtime's a really exciting time for us to be monitoring grouse. It's where we get some of our most important data regarding trends in our grouse populations. The other thing that we spend a lot of time doing is estimating productivity. So basically, how many chicks do we estimate were born during a given year? And we really rely on hunter harvest in order to be able to assess that. It's the best metric that we've got at this point. So each year, many of you have probably driven down like the Jack Creek Road. I also have had a barrel down at Spring Creek. I've been putting one up at Pass Creek. You'll see these kind of rusty looking barrels with a little sign on them. Those are our wing barrels, and our goal at those barrels is to collect sage grouse wings from hunter harvested sage grouse. So we ask that they put one wing from their harvested bird into the barrel. Then I collect those. I have to do them every couple days because it's still really hot in September when we're hunting sage grouse, and I've seen some pretty gross things in those barrels. So we collect them, and then at the end of the sage grouse hunting season, a bunch of Game and Fish biologists get together and we have what's called a wing bee. So we dump out these big bags of wings that we've collected, and we're able to determine the age and sex of those harvested sage grouse based on the wings that we collected throughout the hunting season. So we read those wings. And from that, we're able to determine how many chicks per hen were born that year and survived until the hunting season. Obviously, they did not survive the hunting season, but gives us a good metric of what productivity looked like for that given year. So in Wyoming, average male lek attendance usually declines if our chick per hen ratio is 1.4 chicks per hen or lower. So this fall, 2024, during the hunting season, if we see that there's 1.4 chicks per hen, I would anticipate that next spring in 2025, we're probably going to see a decline in our male lek attendance. So it would probably lend itself to a declining trend in the population. Now, if we see chick per hen ratios of 1.7 or higher, we would estimate that our male lek attendance will go up, which would indicate to us that our population is trending upward. So it's a lot of estimating, but it's, again, the best metric that we have. We rely on those wings, and we read those wings to determine our chick ratio, chick per hen ratio.
So what are you actually looking for in the wings to make that count?
Very good, yeah. So this is kind of you can't really see it, but this is one of the guides that we use. And basically, this is a primary feather from a sage grouse. I just picked this up on a lek the other day. But you can assess based on the wear and shape of the primary feathers, whether it's an adult, juvenile, or yearling bird. So it depends on the wear of that feather and the shape. Adult feathers will have a big shoulder to their primaries, a shoulder to this feather, whereas juveniles and yearlings will have really pointed flight feathers or primary feathers. So we look at these primaries. We also look at the secondaries to determine age, and then size tells us whether it's a male or a female. Because they are sexually dimorphic, even the chicks, the male chicks will be much larger than the female chicks. So we've got some cutoffs. We've got these like silly rulers that we use, and we measure the primary wings to determine whether it's a male or female, because we can determine male versus female based on just size of the overall wing.
So you're really interested in this year's young, not the older wings?
Yeah, so we really want to know what productivity looks like, because productivity, or that chick per hen ratio, is our best indicator as to what we might see the following year.
So it's chick per hen for the most recent year?
Mm-hmm. Yep. So our chicks per hen last year, like in this area, I think we were right at 1.8 chicks per hen, which would indicate to us, without ever having visited a lek this spring, that we will probably have increased attendance at our leks. It's not always the case, it's not always perfect in wildlife, unfortunately, but so far I would say that's probably what we're seeing. We're probably seeing an increase in male attendance, which will indicate hopefully an increasing population statewide. We've had, just in the recent past, so leading into 2021, that year that was that trough as far as male attendance, I think our chicks per hen were like 1.2 down in this country. So it was true that year too. Like our chicks per hen were below that threshold that we think we need to have an increase in male attendance, and we definitely saw it the following year in our male attendance. So kind of neat. You can predict a lot just based on a pile of wings that you collect. So hunting seasons for sage grouse are kind of controversial. You may know that, you may not know that, but they seem to be kind of controversial, especially because we're dealing with a bird that has the potential in the future to be listed. But one of the things I reiterate year after year is that hunters are a huge component of how we estimate our populations and our predictive ability to tell us what productivity and what our attendance might be the next fall. It's a really important component of managing sage grouse and how we determine how our populations are doing. So I don't know of another way that we could collect this many sage grouse wings if we didn't have some hunter harvest going on. So it is a pretty important component in sage grouse management, I believe. A few other sage grouse facts. I wouldn't be doing my job as a biologist any good if I wasn't going to talk to you about poop. It seems like every day I'm talking to someone about wildlife poop, and today is no different. So poop is kind of an interesting thing when it comes to grouse. You can tell a lot about what a grouse is consuming, kind of what activity they're involved in, and it just helps you generally locate where grouse might be. So these are maybe some tough pictures, but I've got some fresh examples for you over there. So in the wintertime, a sage grouse's diet is 100% sagebrush leaves, which makes them very unique. Other species that are in the sagebrush steppe, like we oftentimes see pronghorn antelope, right, or mule deer, although those species are consuming sagebrush, they're oftentimes diluting that sagebrush component of their diet with other things that they're able to find. The reason is sagebrush leaves have a lot of chemical compounds called terpenes in them, which are not necessarily toxic to other species, but they don't digest very well. Sage grouse have an amazing ability to deal with those chemical compounds because their guts are designed differently. So those terpenes are separated in the sage grouse's gut, and they're stored in what is called the cecum. And eventually they're excreted into like what we call a cecal tar, which I just think is so cool. It's this little black tar patch right here. When you see one of those, they're really common on sage grouse leks, especially if you walk out to that lek site soon after strutting, but these degrade in the environment very quickly. So if you find a tar patch like that, or like this, since I've got one right here, now you guys are going to want to shake my hand afterward, right? If you find some of these tar patches, that means there was a grouse there not too long ago. So it's just a really good indicator that grouse were there and close by not too long ago. And this is basically what they're excreting and how they're dealing with that chemical compound within the sagebrush leaves. Everything else that they're digesting is being sent through their gut system, but it's being excreted in a pellet form. I can't get this feather off. That looks like a Cheeto. So we call these Cheetos, really scientific, but you'll see these Cheetos out in the sagebrush. They're often indicative of like a roosting area, especially if you find like a big pile like this. That's probably like a grouse has spent an evening there feeding, it's spent quite a bit of time. So everything else besides the chemical compounds of the sagebrush are excreted in these pellets that we call Cheetos. Pretty cool. So if you find a bunch of Cheetos in a spot, it's usually indicative of a roost area. There's sometimes you walk out in the sagebrush, like if you guys go up towards Spring Creek by the Y-Dot shop, that's one of our winter concentration areas for sage grouse. You'll find those Cheetos everywhere. That's just like grouse have spent their entire winter here, and that's why they've got all the Cheetos. And again, you won't usually find those tar piles because they degrade pretty quickly. So if you're seeing tar piles, you're probably pretty close to like a lek site. That's probably most frequently where you're going to see those cecal tars. Another cool thing about sage grouse is we consider them to be an umbrella species. I don't know if you all have heard, but there was this kind of saying going around several years ago when we were first starting to investigate the concept of umbrella species with sagebrush obligates was what's good for the bird is good for the herd. And basically the meaning of that is if we are doing things to conserve sage grouse in the habitats that sage grouse inhabit, we're going to benefit all these other sagebrush obligates. So the herd would be mule deer. Mule deer are one of our iconic Wyoming species. We've got a lot of concerns about how our mule deer herds are performing. And generally what we have found, if we're doing things that are conserving sagebrush environments or habitats in terms of trying to conserve sage grouse, we're also going to be doing a lot of benefit for a lot of other species. Mule deer is one of the iconic ones that we think about a lot. But there's like brewer sparrows. Name a sparrow that lives in the sagebrush. If you're conserving sagebrush habitats for sage grouse, you're probably going to be conserving those species as well. So umbrella species is something we consider a lot. You can do a lot of good as far as conserving habitats for or viable populations of sage grouse, but also benefiting a lot of other species out there in the sagebrush, which is super important. And I just thought this picture was cute, like a little sage grouse with an umbrella. So cute. So what are some of the threats to sage grouse? We talked about, overall we're starting to see lower peaks. Those troughs are getting deeper as far as our populations are concerned with grouse. So these are some of the things that we commonly think of as potential risk factors or threats to sage grouse. And this isn't necessarily only in Wyoming. West-wide, sage grouse populations are declining, and these are pretty common threats across the Intermountain West. So the first one being drought. Drought is probably the biggest indicator of how our populations are going to be performing. It seems like when we break out of these drought cycles, we start seeing climbing populations of grouse and a bunch of other sagebrush obligates. So drought is a huge concern. Do we have the ability to manipulate weather to the point where we can break drought? Probably not, at least I haven't figured it out, but drought is certainly a concern for us when it comes to overall threats to sage grouse. Invasive species are another one that as managers we consider a lot, and we've got a lot of partners here in the Valley who have done a huge push to try to combat invasive species. The biggest one that we're dealing with in this country is likely cheatgrass. So that's that perennial right there, or excuse me, it's an annual invasive. Cheatgrass is pretty abundant in Carbon County. We've got a lot of cheatgrass in Wyoming in general. So the concern about cheatgrass is it outcompetes native forage. So those forbs and other grasses that grouse might be selecting for, especially early on during the early brood rearing, they're outcompeting those species. There's very little nutritional condition or nutritional value for cheatgrass. So they're not providing a lot to the bird, even if they are feeding on little leaves or stems of cheatgrass. Probably the biggest concern with cheatgrass is that it makes our landscapes more prone to wildfire. And wildfire, although good in some places, a lot of intense wildfires continually happening in the sagebrush steppe is not necessarily great for sagebrush. It takes a lot of years to make a sagebrush community that looks like this. It could take 20 to 30 years for sagebrush to come back after wildfire. So having a lot of wildfire on repeat, which is typically what we see in cheatgrass prone communities, not so great for a species that relies on sagebrush. So cheatgrass is one of the big threats. When we move up towards like northeastern Wyoming, they're starting to deal with a species called Medusa head, which has similar implications. Like it just can outcompete all the other forbs and grasses that are in the landscape, and then also just makes it a lot more conducive for wildfire. So invasive species are certainly one thing that we're monitoring. Like I said, we've got a lot of partners, the conservation district, private landowners. Basically everyone's on board with combating cheatgrass, and usually that takes form of spraying cheatgrass. There's some other treatments that you can do, but spraying is probably the biggest treatment that we've looked at in the more recent past for cheatgrass. The next one that we think about a lot is development. So we don't have as much oil and gas development, at least in this portion of Carbon County, as a lot of other places, but we do have a lot of wind development that is either happening or will be happening in the near future. It's not necessarily the turbine that could have an impact on sage grouse. I don't think there's a lot of research out there about sage grouse, flying into a wind farm and getting knocked over by a turbine, but it's all the other features that come with a wind farm, like more roads with more traffic, potentially more transmission. All of that's actually taking away some of those sagebrush, or some of that sagebrush that those species are relying on. So development, I think there's a lot of ways through our executive order, or the governor's executive order, that we've been able to manage how development's occurring on the landscape to best not necessarily benefit sage grouse, but be in the same area as sage grouse. But there's definitely a lot we have to learn about how we can site development so that we are not having negative impacts on sage grouse.
Is development one of the main reasons for reduction in sage grouse in the northeast Wyoming?
It definitely coincides. So the population declines have definitely coincided with an increase in oil and gas development. Yeah, I think there's a lot of other factors, drought probably being one of the main factors, but there's a lot more oil and gas development up in that country and in fairly close proximity to those, what used to be contiguous stands of sagebrush. Yeah. So we think about a lot of development in Carbon County and how best to site that. Right now, I'll talk a little bit about core areas in a couple slides, but right now, wind development is not allowed to occur within core areas, and most of the Saratoga area is within core. So I don't anticipate, unless something major happens with a new governor, us seeing a lot of new wind development within our core areas, at least in Carbon County. But it's definitely something we monitor and try to work with those project proponents to best site it so it doesn't impact grouse. Woody plant expansion. This is a kind of a hard picture to see, but you guys are probably all familiar with these landscapes that are, sagebrush steppe that are being encroached by conifers or junipers. A good example would be if you take the road to the Bennett Axis areas, or the Bennett Mountain Axis areas. There's some encroaching conifers there, and a lot of concern about what they're doing for that sagebrush environment. So they soak up a lot of water. Those junipers soak up a lot of water that could be used for other vegetated species there, like sagebrush. There's also a lot of concern because junipers create new perches for avian predators like ravens or raptors. So the more kind of hierarchical vegetation you have, the more roosting and perch sites you have for one of the main predators of sage grouse, which are going to be raptors. So lots of concern about junipers or conifers encroaching on our sagebrush habitats. We've been really proactive, I would say, in Carbon County and down in the Saratoga area. The Conservation District has done a ton of work with juniper removal in our sagebrush communities already, and it's something we'll continue to be looking at in the near future. And one of the other threats that can't be ignored are certainly predators. Sage grouse are a prey species, right? They evolved with predators. We're never going to be void of predators on our landscape. The biggest predators for sage grouse, especially nest predators, are going to be ravens and raptors. The one thing that I like to point to is human development doesn't necessarily help them in terms of decreasing predation. We have not done sage grouse any benefit by building landfills next to leks, building transmission lines with high roosting or perching sites next to leks. So there is definitely a human component to why we're seeing predation be such a threat to sage grouse currently. So although we've got, we definitely have ravens, we'll probably always have a lot of ravens, I think there's a lot of things that we can do as humans to try to minimize the risk to sage grouse. That might take some kind of creative thinking. We've got a lek over by Buck Springs Arena, and I think about how close that is to proximity to our landfill and how much raven activity there is at our landfill that probably wouldn't be there if we didn't have a landfill. Obviously, as a community, we need a landfill, but are there proactive measures we can take to kind of reduce the number of ravens that are available to be potentially predating sage grouse nests? Just something we got to think about. And sometimes those are hard decisions and expensive decisions to make. So predators are definitely a threat. Aerial predators, I would say, are probably the biggest threat to sage grouse, but we've got foxes, skunks, all those things. What do they like? They like culverts. They like things that we've built for them. So yeah, lots of predators out there. will never be void of predators. They evolved with predators, but we have to consider how we can minimize those risks for sage grouse in terms of predators. This is just a cool graphic if you guys want to know kind of how sage grouse are related to the entire sagebrush community. This is an NRCS graphic, so I think they do an entire poster of it, so it's kind of a cute poster, but it kind of touches on all the things we already talked about in terms of how sage grouse are an umbrella species, how we can effectively manage for sage grouse, and how that affects all these other species on the landscape. I'm not going to get into the details of core areas because it's complicated at best, but we do manage Wyoming's greater sage grouse based on a core area strategy. And kind of the neat thing about sage grouse, like I said, is you can kind of anticipate where the bulk of our breeding populations are going to be just based on highly attended lek sites. So what Wyoming did is we looked at our most highly attended lek sites and built a buffer around it about where we anticipate most of those hens nesting and spending their entire life cycle with their chicks. And basically our strategy is trying to conserve those areas that are of most benefit to the most birds. With this strategy, we are conserving about 80% of Wyoming's sage grouse by only protecting about 25% of Wyoming's landscape, which is pretty good bang for your buck, I guess. So the core area strategy is all pointing to how can we get the most bang for our buck, how can we have as little impact on humans while still having the most impact on conserving sage grouse. And that ended up being this core area strategy. Wyoming was really a leader in developing core areas. Most Western states have kind of taken over after Wyoming's effort to protect sage grouse in core areas. We also have a governor's sage grouse executive order. This really dictates how development occurs across Wyoming in terms of development within and outside of core areas. So this was another really proactive step that Wyoming governors have taken to have this executive order. And it's really been one of the reasons that this bird has not been listed. Because we are the stronghold of sage grouse in Wyoming, because we were taking these proactive measures to conserve core areas and cite how development was occurring and potentially not impacting sage grouse. This executive order, I hope we continue to see governors that continue with executive orders like this, but it's really an important part of conserving sage grouse and probably why this bird has not been listed so far. And lastly, I'll just do a plug for our sage grouse local working groups. If you all are interested in sage grouse conservation, we do have a South Central Sage Grouse local working group, which is made up of a combination of a bunch of different stakeholders, ag interest, industry interest, just general interest in sage grouse. And those folks within that working group have a lot of ability to fund conservation projects within our local communities. They've also been involved in core area revisions. So most recently, we did go through a core area revision. Those stakeholders within those working groups were a huge part of that. So we meet about 2 to 3 times a year, depending on the projects that are coming down the line for the sage grouse working groups. But we usually try to advertise those. We usually have the meetings here in Saratoga. We've had a few in Rawlins. But if you all are interested in sage grouse, this is a really great way for you to be involved locally with sage grouse management. So it's called the South Central Sage Grouse Local Working Group. We've got a landing page on the Game Fish website. So if you want to check out kind of when our meetings are scheduled, it's all there. So there's your plug for another working group you can be on if you're not involved enough already. So just briefly, some of the conservation planning and projects that we've been working on in terms of sage grouse, and this is local to the Platte Valley. We've been working with partners. This is not just game and fish efforts. We rely on a lot of partners. We've got a lot of private land that sage grouse inhabit, so we need cooperation from landowners, which we've had great cooperation. Also our conservation district, BLM, Forest Service partners have all been great in getting some of these conservation projects off the ground. So not great pictures, but these first 2 pictures are just images of some juniper removal. So juniper removal is a big project that we've been implementing the last few years. Again, we're trying to release some of those nutrients back into the sagebrush environment, taking away those species, those conifer species that are kind of just sucking up a lot of water, and also creating those perch sites that can be detrimental for sage grouse populations just because it attracts more predators. So juniper removal has been something that we've been working on with our partners. Juniper removal can be controversial. We've had some projects over in the Bags area recently that have evoked a lot of emotions from folks. People like junipers, it seems. There is some value in junipers for providing thermal refuge for mule deer or other big game species. So it's all about balance. We wanted to take these conservation measures that are going to benefit these sagebrush communities, but we also have to give a nod to those other species that might be utilizing junipers. So we're kind of working on what those logistics look like, but juniper removal is one that you'll probably be hearing about in the Saratoga area for years to come, because we continue to have a lot of encroachment into our sagebrush habitats. Fence conversions, that's a huge thing that we've been working on across the valley for years now. These primarily benefit big game species that are trying to move through the landscape, but the secondary benefit is reducing potential collisions or sage grouse collisions. So sage grouse, especially when they're first fledged, they're definitely some issues with fences and flying into fences. So converting these fences to like the non-woven structure or fence design has certainly benefited sage grouse. Again, the primary benefit for these fences are for big game species, but sage grouse definitely benefit as well. This bottom picture here is us spraying for cheatgrass. So again, cheatgrass is one of our primary concerns as an invasive annual grass across the Platte Valley, and we have had a lot of work with Carbon County Weed and Pest to spray and treat cheatgrass across the valley. So if you see a helicopter, usually August through early October, kind of flying routine transects across sagebrush habitats, there's a good chance that they're treating cheatgrass. So that's aerial spraying that we're doing. The other thing that we've really started to dabble in the last few years are these what we call low-tech structures, and basically we're putting these in these wet or mesic areas, so those wet meadows that those chicks and hens really rely on during late brood rearing. So we're putting these dam structures in place in these areas so that we can hold more water or spread water across the landscape. So a big thing is erosion creates channeling, which makes the water leave the countryside a lot quicker than we'd like to see. We'd like to hold water on the landscape, make those areas wetter and greener for a longer period of time. And these low-tech structures, they don't look like much, and that's by design. They're not supposed to look like much, but they do hold water for more time on the landscape, creating more forbs, so those flowering plants, and also just more areas for those sage grouse to go feed. These benefit a whole suite of big game species as well. So mule deer, pronghorn, everything that's selecting for forbs in that early fall, late fall time frame really benefit from these structures. Turns out, even though they're low tech and they don't look like much, they require a bunch of permitting when they're on private land, or excuse me, when they're on public land. So we've been kind of focusing our efforts on landowners who are interested in these type of structures on private land, because that doesn't require the same amount of permitting or NEPA or whatever the permits might be. So we've kind of we were really excited about these structures early on. We wanted to put a bunch out on BLM lands, and then it turns out you need a lot of permits, even for a little pile of rocks, it seems like. So we've been focusing those efforts in private lands mostly. So if you know any private landowners who are interested in keeping water on the landscape longer, get them in touch with myself or Britt Burdett here in Saratoga, and we're happy to talk about these low-tech structures. But for not much money, you can make a lot of impact in these sagebrush communities with these types of structures. So kind of neat in that sense. I think this might be the last slide, but I just wanted you all to know about a public viewing lek. All of you, it seems like, have been to a lek. Maybe it's been this lek, maybe it's not, but we do have a public viewing lek. It's called the Pass Creek 24 lek. So this is right off of County Road 406, or the Pass Creek Road, and this is open to the public. It doesn't mean that we take an admission ticket or you have to pay for admission, but it is open to the public. We make it known kind of where the location is so folks can go out there and see what sage grouse do during the strutting time frame. So just a few ethics if you do choose to go visit this lek. We recommend that you arrive at the lek site at least 1 hour to a half hour before sunrise. Obviously don't drive onto the lek. It's kind of an interesting thing with the Pass Creek lek because they will strut right in the middle of the road. So just use common sense if you're going to be going out there. If there's birds strutting in the middle of the road, don't drive through the strutting birds. Wait till they move off the road. Overall, sage grouse are pretty sensitive, but during the strutting time frame, They're pretty resilient to traffic, especially these birds are pretty familiar with what vehicles are, what people are. So give them enough time to move off the center of the road, move a distance from the road, and you can drive on back home if you need to. But yeah, don't drive onto the lek. Park away from the ledge of the lek. So bring good optics. If you've got binoculars or a spotting scope, that gives you the opportunity to park away from the lek. Turn off the vehicle lights and engine. Use your binoculars or optics to observe the birds. Stay in your vehicle. Some people will set up blinds on sage grouse leks or near sage grouse leks. I definitely don't recommend that, especially with the Pass Creek lek. You can see enough from the roadway from your vehicle that you don't need to set up a blind. The recommendation to not leave the lek until the birds do. That's for more of these remote leks. For Pass Creek, you can leave, just be like using common sense about it. I would say don't bring your pets to the lek. I've seen lots of people come with dogs. Don't bring your pets to the lek if you can. If you do have to bring a dog with you, make sure that they're quiet and that they're locked up in your vehicle.
Is it marked?
No, it's not marked.
How far?
So it's about 2 miles from Highway 130. And I might offer you all a day. If you're interested in caravanning out there some morning, I could make myself available to kind of lead folks out there if that might be of interest for the group. But it's a pretty early morning, so I could pick a day on the calendar and if you all are interested. But 2 miles onto the Pass Creek Road. We used to say that the birds were on the right side of the road. Right now, in the last couple of years, they've been strutting on both sides of the road. So if you don't see them on the right side of the road, look on the left side of the road. Postpone your visit if the roads are muddy. It's just a lot of common sense. Sometimes people lack that, it seems. So late April is the best time to visit because most of the breeding activity is occurring. You'll see a lot more like younger males out on the lek sites. So late April is a good time to go visit, but they will strut clear until middle of May, so you've got plenty of time. Do y'all know where Pass Creek Road is? Have you all been to this lek? Okay. Okay, good deal. And there's also other leks around Saratoga. Like I said, I've got about 77 in my district. So we don't advertise where leks are. We like to be discreet about that information. We do try to at least give one lek out within each biologist district as a public viewing lek. That way folks remain interested about sage grouse conservation. It's our sacrificial lamb lek, I guess you could say. But if this lek, like if you're looking to take like really great pictures of birds, this lek might not be it. You can chat with me. I'm happy to kind of point you in the direction of a few other local leks as long as you're discreet about the information and not advertising on Facebook or whatever it might be. But most of the time, you all know where leks are more than I do sometimes. So you might know of some other leks that are easier to visit. But this is our Pass Creek lek. It seems to, at least in the last couple of years, we've got a lot of folks, both non-residents and residents traveling from all over to come view our public viewing leks. So we've got quite a bit of traffic at this lek the last few years, it seems like. Okay, I think that's all I have, unless you had any questions.
I have a question on the leks. The same lek has been there for, do they keep coming back to the same area, or do they, that one lek, like 50 years? Or,
yeah, there's some leks that we probably didn't discover them until the 80s as a department, but there's some leks that we assume birds have been going to for at least 100 years. Yeah, and they'll come back to that same lek site. We will see some variations. So last year was an interesting year where we had so much snow late into the spring. Birds still showed up, it seemed like, at those traditional lek sites, but they were moved off into kind of different areas of the lek. Like the Pass Creek lek, that public viewing lek, that was a huge snowdrift that was pushed up from the county road, clear until, I think, early May. So the birds were still there, they were just like 100 yards further off of their lek than they typically are. So slight variations based on weather. I don't know that I've ever seen weather cause them to leave a lek completely. They just kind of vary where they're actually strutting. But yeah, pretty amazing. Like these leks are hundreds of years old.
Wow.
and those birds continue to show up year after year. And we definitely don't know about every lack that occurs. We estimate we probably know about 80% of occupied leks, which is pretty good. But we've been, at least in the last few years, trying to do a lot of aerial surveys in the springtime to see if we can locate some of these leks that we just don't have knowledge of yet.
When the predator, real quick, the predators on the coyotes,
Yeah.
is that your worst predator for sage?
I would say the avian predators or those aerial predators are what we've seen to be the biggest nest predators. But it depends on the area and the state. So there's other areas of the state where skunks and foxes are a pretty big impact. I would say here we're seeing more of those corvids like ravens causing quite a few issues with nests. Carbon County is looking at doing some raven control, more from a human health and safety regard at landfills in Carbon County, but it will probably have some impact for sage grouse too, I assume. Yeah. Coyotes, they definitely, I think they're opportunistic. If they're cruising and they find a nest, they're going to take advantage of that. Yeah.
What's the distribution, winter distribution compared to the location of the leks? Are they closer in, or
Yeah,
is there a relationship?
Yeah, I think we're trying to figure that out. We don't know a ton about winter concentration areas, which is kind of unfortunate. So we're getting more information on that. I would say there's still, for the most part down this country, it seems like birds have access to continuous stands of sagebrush, so they can winter fairly close to where their lek sites are. Now there are other places in like Montana where birds have been shown to migrate 40, 50 plus miles to lower elevation where there's going to be less snow, where they have access to sagebrush. Our birds don't necessarily need to do that here in the valley. Like, we've got low elevation sagebrush stands that are exposed through the winter on most winter years. So they're not traveling too far, I would say, from their lek sites. But there are birds that travel a very long distance to have access to those continuous stands of sagebrush that aren't snow covered. But we're still trying to figure a lot out. I saw what I thought were maybe some new winter concentration areas last year. If you guys were leaving town just north along like mile marker 12 to 15, we had a pile of sage grouse that were just off the highway for the last like couple months of tough winter there. I had never seen like big numbers of wintering birds there, so that might have been new because of the severity of winter. But we're learning a lot. Like Spring Creek, I think, is a pretty popular winter concentration area, but we've got a lot of leks in that close proximity too. They can travel when they want to, but I think for the most part they would prefer not to fly 40 miles from a lek.
Did I misunderstand? How many leks do you have in your district?
I've got 77 occupied or known leks, and then we've got a number of what I would consider unoccupied leks. So that's a combination of leks that used to have birds and now we don't see birds, or leks that were or places that were identified as potential leks, and then we haven't been able to verify birds attending those leks years after. So we have a lot of leks, especially in my country. They used to do a lot of spring flights in the 80s, so aerial surveys, and they would mark these birds out in the sagebrush strutting, but GPSs weren't as good as they are now, so those locations were always kind of sketchy. So it's been my goal, and I think a lot of other biologists' goals, is to go out and verify those locations and determine if there were actually strutting sites or leks out there, or maybe if it was just a miscellaneous place where a bird was. But yeah, 77 occupied leks. I bet there's several just private lands that we don't have access to. I've got a lot of checkerboard in my country that is just tough to access. And I bet there's leks in there that we just don't know about. We just have to do the right survey or have the right person say, I saw birds there some morning.
I'm just curious about the spraying for the cheatgrass.
Yeah.
How do they have a spray that's selective for just the cheatgrass?
Yeah, so we are moving toward using a chemical called Rejuvra, which is hopefully based on trials. So they do a lot of trials with these chemicals that we use for treating invasive species. And that's how we determine the selectivity and can choose and pick which one is the most selective. But we are moving from what we used to call plateau to Rejuva. One of our concerns with the previous chemical that we used to use was that we were seeing impacts on mountain shrub communities, which is not good when you're also trying to promote mule deer habitat, pronghorn habitat, elk. So we were having concerns about the previous chemical that we were using not being as selective in treating the target, which is cheatgrass or that annual invasive. We're now moving to a chemical that's been through a lot of testing and through the trials seems to be a lot more selective. So it's not perfect for sure, but it's a lot of trial prior to applying on the ground. And especially when you're working with federal management agencies that have to go through environmental impacts, they're going to ensure that you're using the most selective chemical. And BLM was one of the first federal agencies that said, we've got a lot of concern about what this previous chemical is doing to mountain shrubs. And then we went out on the ground and said, oh yeah, we've got some concerns too. Is there something else we can look to that's more effective at treating the invasive species that we're after instead of promoting some kind of weird things with our mountain shrub communities?
I think you said that you did those treatments in late summer or fall.
Mm-hmm.
What are you actually killing?
So that it will go into the seed bed within the soil. So the timing of treatment depends on the chemical that you're using. So plateau we were using early fall, I guess you would call it, in August to kind of early September timeframe. With this Rejuva, I think we're going to be moving to more of a summer application before that cheatgrass is actually senesced. But it is going into the soil and trying to get at that seed bed there.
So you're trying to kill off the to reduce the new growth in the
Yes.
spring.
Yep.
Seeds.
Yeah, cheatgrass is a funky thing. I don't know how much you guys have spent around cheatgrass, but it's the first thing to green up. So when you're out this spring, if you see this big flush of bright green early, it's probably cheatgrass. And then it cures out, and then it can green up again a second time in the fall. So it seems like the plant that can never die, but it cures out super quick, so that's what makes it prone to fire, and then it greens back up, cures back out again, so we could get another second flush of wildfire if conditions are right. So pretty scary in that sense.
I heard that came from Europe too, right? I mean, they used it for packing dishes and stuff like that, and kind of got out and spread.
Yeah, I mean, it's been in Wyoming
Yeah.
for a long time now. Most of the concentrations that we see or the large flushes of it that we see are along roadways, railroads. That's where we see a lot of it kind of stemming from. But yeah, we're starting to see, there's some places like the Encampment River corridor, it's almost entirely cheatgrass now, it feels like. So they're going to be treating that this next fall. Pennock Mountain's got a lot of cheatgrass that came in after a wildfire. So we've treated that several times. That's the other thing, the chemical that we used to use, plateau, it required every 2 to 3 years to come in and retreat it. We will hopefully get a longer treatment window from this new Rejuva, so we don't have to come back as soon after treatment, because it gets expensive, especially when you're applying a chemical at a landscape scale.
On CBS Sunday Morning several weeks ago, their Last Moment in Nature showed this beautiful bird strutting,
Yeah.
but it had a rust colored, I just assumed it was a sage grouse in South Dakota, but would it probably been a different species then?
I think I had some intel that it was probably a prairie chicken, which kind of sounds like, based on the description, that was a prairie chicken. So there's several species that have similar but not identical breeding or courtship behavior. So in Wyoming, we've got plains sharp-tailed grouse. They've got these big yellow air sacs as well. They've got different colored eye combs. They're a smaller bird in general compared to a sage grouse, but similar activity in the springtime. They'll all congregate at a lek, and display there. So we've got sharp-tailed grouse here in Wyoming. There's a lot of lesser prairie chickens in some of the other western states to the east of us. So I bet it was a prairie chicken. I don't know if it was a lesser prairie chicken or what, but
Thank you.
yeah, I bet that's what it was. Yes, sir.
I can show you a lot where there's one side of the road sharp-tail and the other side of the road sage.
I would love to know about that.
First time we've ever seen it, we've counted for 20 years.
Yeah.
And we're up here on the Pennock side.
Oh, really?
And we've noticed that our lek has moved about half, 3/4 of a mile from where they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
And they have actually moved.
Yeah.
But these are out on the Jack Creek side, the sharp-tail and sage chickens both.
Okay.
We've never seen that. We were counting sharp-tail and we finally got where we get there. And we seen 3 right along the road and on the other side of the road. We said, well, what are those? They're sage chickens.
Oh, cool. So I know of one sharp-tail lek off Jack Creek Road. I call it the Twin Groves lek. It's right before you climb up the hill there. Okay. And then I did not know of a sage grouse lek in close proximity though.
Well, this is the first time we've
We've
seen
only
them.
seen it one time.
Okay.
So,
Was that this year? Okay. You were able to get through there.
Yeah, they.
I haven't even gone that way yet because I
Sharp
ran into a
tail.
snowdrift last time I drove
Sharp-tail
there.
are just coming in.
Okay. Very good.
They got clear Twin Groves, right?
Yeah, we got a little bit past them.
But
Oh, nice,
Road
okay.
paper Plymouth Road.
Okay. Yeah, we do have at least one sharp-tail lek that I know of. I suspect we've got more sharp-tail leks that I just have not identified. I talked to a Forest Service, I don't know what his title was, but he flushed a couple sharp-tails like late spring off the Spring Creek Road, like a little higher elevation. So if you all see sharp-tails over there, let me know. I'm always interested in where our sharp-tails might be strutting.
More of them.
Yeah, yeah. And then the Bank side, just across the Continental Divide, they've got a pretty strong population of sharp-tailed grouse. The jury's kind of out yet as to whether those are plain sharp-tail, Columbian sharp-tail, or whether there is no difference between the two. So kind of neat. If you see sharp-tails over west of the Continental Divide, right now we've been calling them Columbian sharp-tail. We think that they're different than plain sharp-tail. I think the jury's still out. So there's been some recent research, well, the last few years there's been a couple folks out of the Beck lab at the university looking at is there a difference in these sharp-tails west and east of the Continental Divide.
You have to wind them all up, they all run together.
Yeah.
That's how we describe them.
Yeah, I would venture to say our sharp-tail strutting is actually a little more entertaining than the sage grouse. So.
Mr. Hyatt told me it was something to see.
It is.
We're just hilarious.
They are. Yep.
Wind
Yep.
them up.
Yep, that's exactly right. But if you haven't seen a sage grouse lek, it's definitely something worth seeing. I don't imagine our populations are going to be skyrocketing in the near future, so I think now is the time to probably get out and enjoy those birds that we still have. Hopefully we're approaching a peak in population in the next few years, so now's the time. Happy to talk leks, sage grouse. You can look at poop, tail fans, whatever you want up here. So, thanks for having me again, you guys.